We're talking splatter films at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus, everybody. My name is Professor Victor, and as usual, I'm going to be your host as we go through all of the essential, must-see, noteworthy, and downright notorious modern horror films. If you're new, I recommend you check the description down below for a link to our introduction video. That'll give you a good understanding of how the Horror Movie Syllabus works. But in short, we take a particular subgenre of horror and we look at 3 representative examples of that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're talking about is splatter films. Now, splatter as a subgenre might be a little bit controversial. I used to think that splatter and slasher were the same thing, that a splatter film and a slasher film was synonymous. And apparently that's not true. And I'm not the only person who thought that, but that is not quite accurate. A splatter film essentially is a gory film. And not just a gory film, but a film that revels in the gore, that really focuses on and just dives headfirst into the gory aspects of the film. So you can see the confusion between a splatter film and a slasher film because slasher films tend to be really gory. In other words, if the Venn diagram between slasher films and splatter films is probably pretty close to a circle, as the two of them would probably have a lot of overlap. That said, there are slasher films that aren't particularly gory enough to be considered splatter, and there are splatter films that are definitely not slasher films. So it is worth having a separate subgenre for the splatter films, even though I really wasn't going to include it into the horror movie syllabus originally. When I did the research, it really justified having it as a separate subgenre. Now, we've talked before about how the horror movie syllabus has a lot of movies that could fit into multiple subgenres, that really there's a lot of overlap and you can move movies from one subgenre to another. That's part of what makes the horror movie syllabus so fun, actually, is it becomes a bit of a puzzle as you figure out where you want to place a particular movie on the syllabus. Splatter really, really exemplifies this issue because so many of the splatter films also fit into one or more other subgenres. That was one of the reasons why I thought maybe I didn't need it to be in there, because there are so many movies that are gory, but there are also a ghost movie or a slasher movie or a possession movie, etc. That said, I'm kind of glad we do have this separate subgenre, if for no other reason than to talk about some really notorious films. The 3 movies that we're going to talk about are 3 such films. They have a lot of notoriety around them. They're probably more well known by reputation than by people actually seeing them. And we're going to go ahead and talk about them because that's what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. We talk about movies that are noteworthy, and these are 3 such movies. As usual, we've organized them as undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate. In this case, that's going to indicate the increasing level of disturbingness of the movie. So that'll be fun. Let's go ahead and get into them. The first movie we're talking about in the splatter subgenre, our undergraduate level selection, is Snuff. I like how Snuff has a red DVD case. That's pretty funny. Snuff came out in 1976, and I'm just going to cut to the chase. It's a bad movie. It's not good at all. And that's kind of where the start of the notoriety begins, because the producer of the movie realized he had a bit of a stinker on his hands. I think the original movie was called Slaughter, and it wasn't good, and it wasn't really doing anything. Until the producer decided to rename it Snuff, and then release it as supposedly an actual legitimate snuff film. Now, again, this is the mid-70s, so this is where the urban legend of the snuff film is probably first really gaining some traction. The idea of, in case you don't know, a film being made where somebody is killed in real life on camera, and then that movie is traded or sold for people to watch for their viewing pleasure. There's never really been a documented case of a snuff film actually existing, but it's been something of a urban legend lore for years and years and years, and is actually the impetus for many, many horror films. But I think this might have been the first time that somebody actually legitimately tried to claim that they had an actual snuff film that they were releasing in theaters, as if that wasn't a crime. Really ridiculous idea, but it worked. The movie really got a lot of buzz. People were angry about the fact that they would show this movie that would depict an actual murder on camera, and the advertising for the movie was really leaning into this. It was I think the tagline was something like, the film that could only be made in South America where life is cheap. And the idea was that they had made this horror movie down in South America, and then as part of the movie, they had actually murdered somebody on the set. And so the movie is Slaughter, this South American horror movie that's really, really bad. And at the end, they've tacked on this scene, ostensibly of an actress being murdered on the set, just being like ritually murdered, and it's ridiculously gory, but it's dumb. It's really dumb. It's clear as day that it's not a snuff film. I mean, it's just not shot in a way that's made it believable enough to be a snuff film, but it worked. People were convinced, probably because the gore was actually pretty good, especially for the time. The practical effects were working at the time. I think you look at it now and you can kind of tell. But at the time, probably pretty good, pretty gory, pretty worthy of the splatter tag. But really, the reason why this movie makes the list is not because of the quality of either the movie itself or the tacked on special effects gore of the snuff film at the end. It's that marketing campaign. It's that time of trying to sell people on it being real. That was maybe not the first instance of people trying to market a film as being a true story. I'm thinking off the top of my head of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, trying to use that same method, but trying to actually say that a murder being committed on screen in your movie theater. Well, that was a new twist. That was a new marketing twist that didn't go over well, but did make the movie legendary. Where to this day, it has a reputation of being something of a notorious horror film. Again, the movie, when you watch it, is not going to live up to the expectations of the buzz or the reputation. It might be worth seeing, for no other reason, for you to see just how bad it is, just how much the hype did not really live up to what this movie actually is, just so you can say, yes, I've seen Snuff, and it is no snuff film. It is not anything to get worked up about. So it's really more of a historical relic, an interesting footnote rather than it is a must-see movie. But I'm mentioning it here. I'm putting it in the horror movie syllabus because of that notoriety. I'm not going to say go ahead and see it, but if you do see it, let us know what you think about it. I can't imagine that you think the movie's great, but if you do, please make a case for it. Please let us know why you would think it's great, because I think it's laughably bad. It's not so laughably bad that it's good, but it's laughably bad about how people got so upset about it. So that's Snuff for you. Let us know what you think if you've seen it. The next movie we're going to be talking about, the graduate level movie, is Dead Alive. Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead, is a 1992 movie that came out of New Zealand, and that's noteworthy because of the director. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, then you know that New Zealand is the stomping grounds of Peter Jackson, Academy Award winning director of Lord of the Rings, and didn't win an Academy Award for his direction of Dead Alive. The reason why is because Dead Alive is kind of dumb. It's ridiculous. It's an early film of his, but it is unabashedly violent and gory. It's ridiculously violent and gory. Now you have to remember this is 1992, so Weta, the CGI special effects masters that did the Lord of the Rings movies and those incredible special effects, they're not around in 1992 for Peter Jackson to use for this movie. Everything he's doing in this movie is practical, and that's a big part of the charm of the movie. The movie's plot is somewhat forgettable, if I'm being honest with you. It's this guy who's dealing with basically a zombie contagion. It doesn't even matter. The reason why it doesn't matter is because the whole reason for seeing this movie is the over-the-top gore. The movie uses a lot of practical effects, including stop motion animation, to make these grotesque creatures and these grotesque violent fights and kills, and it's hysterical. It's not trying to be serious. It's totally firmly tongue in cheek funny. Whether or not you find it funny is maybe a matter of taste. I feel like a lot of people probably would just think this is kind of stupid. I think it's kind of stupid, but I can at least recognize that it's having a lot of fun, and I can roll with it because The kills are inventive. I mean, you've got people punching through people's heads, ripping stuff out of their chests, zombies walking around with no legs and their chests wide open and their heads exploding. And it's ludicrous. And everything I'm describing sounds absolutely horrific, but it's really not because it's almost comical because while it looks really, really gross, it doesn't look really realistic, if that makes any kind of sense. They really did lean in towards trying to just have a lot of fun with this and making sure you had a lot of fun with this. The creatures are meant not to scare so much as they are to entertain and maybe make you laugh. And I think they're very successful in that regard. This movie has a bit of a cult following, and it's not hard to see why, because it's just trying to have a laugh and really take you on a bit of a ride. And in that sense, it totally succeeds. It really is a fun endeavor. Peter Jackson doesn't really display a lot of the talent that he would show later on with movies like Lord of the Rings or even Heavenly Creatures, which we'll talk about in another part of the horror movie syllabus. But you can see the talent in terms of the confidence that he shows behind the camera and the willingness to go there to see things that you probably never really thought you'd ever see. He does that in Dead Alive, and he does that in the Lord of the Rings. So you can see the seeds of his talent, of his future endeavors in this movie. If you're a Peter Jackson fan, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you maybe kind of have to see this just to kind of see the humble beginnings of it. If you're a gore fan, or if you just like ridiculous violence, or even if you just like stop motion animation, you definitely should check out Dead Alive. It's a total blast. It's creative people having a lot of fun doing something creative with their special effects, with their makeup and their models. I really love stuff like that. I really love people making something, especially practically speaking, practical effects, and just kind of putting it out there for us to enjoy. This movie, this movie is a kind of a people who love horror, and if you love horror, this is something you owe it to yourself to check out. Like I said, it's not necessarily going to be for everybody, but I don't think that even if it's not for you, I don't think you're going to hate it. I don't think you're going to be sad that you ever watched it. Like I said, there's some gory scenes that'll really stick with you memorably, but not in a way that'll skeeve you out or traumatize you. It'll just make you laugh. It's a lot of fun. Check it out and let us know what you think. The last movie we're talking about today, our postgraduate level movie, is The New York Ripper. The New York Ripper is a 1982 film directed by Italian horror director Lucio Fulci. He's a legend, actually, an Italian legend. He's mostly known for his giallo films, which are kind of horror crime movies. We're going to talk a lot more about giallo films at the horror movie syllabus in the giallo subgenre. Lucio Fulci is famous for his giallos, and a lot of people argue that the New York Ripper is a giallo. You can make that case pretty well, but I've put it here because it's kind of notorious for the violence and gore in it. There's a question as to whether or not that violence or gore is warranted, and I think that's a discussion worth having. But I do think that it deserves a spot here. In fact, I think it deserves the top spot, the undergraduate level spot, because of not so much the gore. I'd say Dead Alive is probably gorier in the broad sense of the word, but in terms of how disturbing the gore is in this movie. New York Ripper is a story about a serial killer terrorizing New York and committing a bunch of murders, and the cops trying to catch him. In fact, that's part of why the giallo thing kind of matters. The giallo is often about the police investigation into the murders, but having a slasher kind of aspect to the murders being committed. So it's almost a mashup of like a crime movie and a slasher movie. And the New York Ripper is no exception to that rule. Where the New York Ripper stands out as a splatter film is those kills, those slasher kills. The killer is kind of a ridiculous killer. I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but I don't think it's too much to say that he has this weird thing where he talks like a duck, and it's really kind of weird. It's bizarre, and I don't know if it really adds too much to the movie. In fact, maybe it almost takes you out of the movie too much. But the kills will definitely keep you into the movie because they're really, really graphic. There's a lot of nudity in this movie as well. Lucio Fulci and the Giallos in particular, there's a lot of sex and violence kind of tied together. There's a whole thing about that again we'll talk about a little bit more in the Giallo video when we get to it. But New York Ripper has that front and center. There's a lot of sex and nudity in the movie, and the violence kind of ties into that in really disturbing ways. There is one scene off the top of my head in particular that really, really was unsettling. So, if you're sensitive to like sexual violence, things like that, this might not be the movie for you. I'm just going to put that out there. It's not the movie for a lot of people. The violence is a bit rough in that regard. Um, that's part of why the movie has a bit of a notoriety. Not just the violence that's in the movie, but also the violence that's not in the movie. Specifically, the movie was cut down to meet some censorship requirements in various countries. And to my knowledge, from all the research I've done, the full uncensored movie has yet to actually be released. If it's been released, it's been released fairly recently, like in the last 5 or 6 years, and I haven't seen it and I couldn't find it. So that is telling me that as rough as this movie is, it probably was a whole lot rougher. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of want to see that rougher version of it. Something that may or may not be apparent so far as we go through the horror movie syllabus is that I have an affinity for movies that are considered really, really taboo or really rough or really notorious. I feel like I need to see them and have them. It's part of the reason why I have Snuff. I really had to get Snuff because of how notorious it was. I was actually really disappointed when I saw the movie, and it's part of why I have the New York Ripper. I'm a big fan of kind of just making sure that these movies are still available and known and recognized, because I think that as the world changes and as we kind of move away from a lot of this stuff, there's not a space for it in the world anymore. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but I just don't want to forget where these horror roots came from. So that's something that drives a lot of these kind of movies for me, is less about the quality of them or even the importance of them in terms of their narrative, and more about the importance of them in terms of horror history, like seeing how horror has evolved. And these movies, these 70s and early 80s movies, the early part of modern horror, they're a lot more rough than the most of what we see in today's horror. And the New York Ripper is a prime example of that. If the New York Ripper were to be remade today, it would probably be fairly dull and kind of ridiculous, because again, the killer in that movie is kind of ridiculous, kind of goofy, but the kills are really, really extreme and rough. And I just don't think that a movie by today's filmmakers would go there, would go for that kind of rough kill. Maybe Rob Zombie would do something like that, but I don't even think Rob Zombie would go quite as far as Lucio Fulci did. And we'll be talking about Fulci in other parts of the horror movie syllabus, because he's known for his gore. It makes perfect sense that he would be here in the splatter subgenre, because Lucio Fulci, he doesn't hold back when it comes to the gore. Uh, New York Ripper is one that I'll go ahead and recommend it if you really like rough, dark stuff. If you like a movie that's extreme violence and has a dark tone, but also has an interesting kind of cops trying to save the day kind of motif. Maybe New York Ripper's for you. It's got a weird tone, man. It's really all over the place, kind of like my review of it. So I'm kind of curious to see what people think of it. If you check it out, let me know what you think, because that movie, it's got weird music in it. It's the tone kind of seems like it slides all over the place. Is it trying to be funny? Is it trying to be like an action film? Is it really trying to be like a gore fest? Yes, yes, and yes. I really like to see what you guys think about it. So if you've seen it, or if you do check it out, please let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the New York Ripper, because I'm not quite even sure how I feel about it, but I do think it's important enough to at least mention here and tell you that you probably should check it out, or at least consider checking it out. So again, let us know what you thought. So those are our three picks on the splatter subgenre of horror, but I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a few extra credit movies. The first one we're going to talk about is The Wizard of Gore by Herschel Gordon Lewis. He is a notorious filmmaker for gore, and this movie is a good example of that. It's about a magician who does these stage shows that appear to be really gory, but there's a big question about whether or not what you're seeing is really reality or an illusion. Again, I don't want to go into things too much because I don't like to spoil things, but this movie is clever. The gore effects are all practical, and at the time, really, really revolutionary and eye popping. I can't say for sure that they really hold up super well now, but I still think they're a lot of fun now. I think that they work pretty good. I think that you can maybe kind of tell what some of the things are, and maybe can kind of see how the gags work, but I don't think that diminishes their impact or their appeal. So I think this is definitely one that still holds up quite a bit. There is a remake of it that stars Crispin Glover. The remake's not bad in no small part because it's got Crispin Glover in it. He's just very, very watchable because he's insane. But the original is the one that has the charm. The original is the noteworthy, notorious one with the really cool gore effects that are they're just kind of a blast. If you're a fan of practical magic, practical movie effects, then this was one you should have seen already. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. Wizard of Gore, it's a classic. The next movie we're going to talk about is a Japanese film called Ichi the Killer. And if you're familiar with Ichi the Killer, you might be questioning why I'm putting it in the horror movie syllabus, because you probably think it's more of a crime movie or an action movie, and you're not wrong. But if you've seen Ichi the Killer, tell me that that's not horrific. I mean, come on. It's Takashi Miike. We've talked about before in the horror movie syllabus, and we may actually talk about again. He's a notorious director for his extremely violent movies. Ichi the Killer is no exception to that. It's got some shockingly violent scenes, some incredibly disturbing images in it. It's a great film. I like the movie a lot. Like I said, it's more crime action than it is horror. But I felt like it deserved a spot, or at least a mention on the horror movie syllabus as a horror movie, because it is pretty horrific. I don't care what other people say. It's pretty. It can qualify as a horror film. It is fun. It's good. It's some amazing imagery in it. It's just disturbing imagery in it. So Takashi Miike delivers again with Ichi the Killer. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Let us know what you think. And the last movie we're going to mention is a rather controversial movie, another Japanese movie, Men Behind the Sun. And that movie is about the atrocities committed by the Japanese during World War II. It is known as an exploitation film, not as a documentary. It tries to claim that it's shining a light on all these atrocities, but it does so in a way that is not, that it's exploitive and not really very sensitive or thought-provoking or thoughtful. I haven't seen this movie, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not so sure that I want to see this movie. It's notorious in its depictions and the rumors of maybe potentially showing a real autopsy and potentially some violence to animals that supposedly didn't really happen, but I'm not so sure. I don't know. I kind of feel like I need to see this movie for the reasons I was mentioning before about kind of just confronting all of these controversial movies and kind of just like knowing what they're about and kind of understanding the history behind everything. But this is one that I've been kind of dragging my heels on checking out. I probably will get around to watching it, and I'm bringing it up here again because of its notoriety. It's not a super famous movie, but people who know horror, who know about it, they'll tell you that this one's supposedly a pretty rough one, pretty controversial one, again, because of taking a subject matter that is very, very serious and treating it in an exploitation manner. Kind of a tough one. So I'm curious about it. I can't help it. That curiosity that killed the cat, so to speak. And maybe I'll check it out. And if I do, probably drop a comment myself letting you know what I think about it. But if you've seen it and you have an opinion on it, I'd like to hear what your opinion is on it. Let us know what we're in for if we do decide to check it out, because I'm a little trepidatious about this one. I won't lie to you. So, and it's rare that I feel trepidatious about a movie. So, very curious. I'd love to hear what you think about it. So that's going to do it for our splatter subgenre video. Again, there's a lot of movies that would be called splatter that probably fit into other subgenres. So there's a real good chance that if there's a movie you thought would be in this video and isn't, that I'm going to be talking about it somewhere else in the horror movie syllabus. But in any event, go ahead and let us know in the comments what movies you think are missing, and let us know why you think they should have been talked about, why you like them or don't like them, as the case may be, why you thought they were controversial, or why you think that I'm a fool for putting a movie that I put here in there instead of putting your movie in there. Let us know. I love these kind of debates. I love the interaction with the fans. So let's go ahead and have a dialogue get started, and let's know what you guys think. I like to give you guys a forum to speak your mind and share your opinions. With that, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys for attending. Class dismissed.